Alrighty, so in this video I'm going to be machining this large steel part, and this part weighed a little over 200 pounds, the slug, before I started machining it. So you can see I loaded it with a hoist. I pushed the tailstock against the slug as I tightened down the chucks, make sure I get a nice good seat on that. So basically this large part is just a big ass bolt, you know. So the end that I'm machining first is going to be the head of the bolt. So I go in with an insert drill and then start rough boring it with the drill. Now when you're using an insert drill, it can be advantageous. You can take pretty good cuts with it. But you got to have a slight angle on that bottom face. Otherwise, the inner insert will start rubbing and start causing you issues, especially the larger you get on the diameter. So that's what I did. I kind of ramped up a little bit on the bottom face of the part, and then I went in there and cleaned it up with my boring tool that I used to finish up the bore with. And I'll tell you what, this part, the diameter of it was actually larger than what would clear for my cross slide. So this is probably about as big of a part as I can machine on this lathe. So now once I got the first side done, I flipped it around and use the tailstock again to seat it as I tighten down the chuck. So then I went back in there with the insert drill and roughed out the bore on the second side. So this part is going to have a shallow bore on the head of the bolt, and then a relatively deep bore on the end of the bolt. And it's going to wind up having a wall / web towards the end of the head. So once I got the bore roughed up, I needed to rough the OD of the part on this second side. Now when I was roughing on the first side, I was able to just use my regular tooling because I had enough overhang on my tool post to machine a certain distance back on the part before it started to interact with the cross slide. But on this second side, I needed to turn quite a bit more of the OD further on back on that part, and it just wasn't going to clear the cross slide. It was going to start interacting with my cross slide. So what I did was, instead of using a typical OD tool, I took a boring bar and I flipped it around and I roughed the OD with a boring bar. Kind of a little bit different, but hey, it worked out pretty good. Now this is sped up quite a bit, but you can see it's still taking quite a bit of time to rough out that OD. So now once I got the OD roughed, I went in there with a boring bar and finish roughed the ID, and then went in and did a finish pass on the ID and make it look all nice and good. And then there you go. This part looks pretty good, and it's ready for heat treat. And then here we go. We got the part back from heat treat, and I'm going to finish turn the OD and make it look all nice. And then it's going to have some pretty large threads that go on to that larger diameter in the back. And then it's going to have a groove on the OD towards the front of it. Now, I would have just used the boring bar to finish up this OD like I did when I was roughing it before heat treat. But I had that large thread that I needed to put in the back, and I knew I was going to have some rigidity issues toning that thread, and I wanted something that would be as strong as possible. So I went ahead and I made this block that I put on my tool post, and that would hold a regular 1-inch OD tooling. So then once I got done finishing the OD, I put in my single point threader, and it was a pretty large threading insert that I needed to use because it's a pretty coarse and deep thread. So, and then this thread too, I did a lot of messing around to get that thread in there, because at first I just started with a regular threading cycle, but once I got to a certain depth, it started to chatter quite a bit because the tool engagement was getting pretty heavy. And so what I had to do was I started moving the tool back and forth, so it was just cutting on one side of the thread or the other side of the thread. And then not even cutting the full side of one thread. So I was just kind of jostling back and forth in there until I got close to the depth that it needed to be. Then I made sure that when I got it to the final depth that everything came out right and it had a nice profile to that thread. But that was quite a bit of messing around to make sure that I could get a nice looking thread without having any chatter, considering the depth of the thread that I was machining. And I think part of the issue on that was for this size and depth of engagement on the threading tool, it would have been nice to have a more rigid machine and more rigid tooling. That would have been a lot easier on me. But I made it through and got a nice looking part. And there you go. Pretty nice looking big ass steel part with a nice big ass thread. So hope you guys enjoyed it. Take it easy and have a good one.